Thank you everyone for having me in this space tonight. I feel really honored to be able to share my family story with you all tonight. As folks have said, storytelling is really personal, it's really sacred. And so I welcome all the emotions that could come up or get activated as I share my story and invite you all to take a moment for yourself as needed if anything feels activated. And I'm excited to share with you. So we're gonna just get started here. And so my story starts with kind of these two photos. And it's so funny thinking about it because, these photos, I don't have a digital version of them. They are only photos that I have in print that I had to scan into the computer for the sake of this presentation. And so I want to start with the photo on the left, and that's a photo of my father. So my dad, his name is Hong Boy, and he was in the military in Vietnam during what in the US we call the Vietnam War and what in Vietnam we call the American War. And so during this war, my father was in the military and he was an officer and he actually had a high ranking position. However, because he was in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or the ARVN, fighting against the the Communist Party, and he lost. So therefore, after he lost, his side lost the war. He was put into what they called re-education camps, which is a misnomer for prison, right? So he was put in prison. He was imprisoned in these re-education camps for years. And during that time, my family, I wasn't in the picture yet, of course, but my family was really poor. But that was the context of him being in war, then being imprisoned. And then later down the line is when he met my mom. And that's when they got married and got together. And so, but before they got married and got together in their own individual lives, they already, after the fall of Saigon, had a lot of different reasons why they wanted to leave Vietnam. And the reason they wanted to leave Vietnam was due to political instability, fear really of what is going to happen in this country, and also not only a need for political stability and safety, but also a need for economic stability and economic safety. And so what happened was, throughout both of their lives and also the lives of my uncles and aunts, they all tried to escape Vietnam by boat. And so this is where we get the term boat people from. But in Vietnamese, we call the phrase vượt biển, which means to cross over the ocean. And so in my family, I don't have their pictures here when they were young and trying to escape Vietnam. But the four members of my family who were actually able to leave Vietnam by boat was my aunt Yi Nam, who ended up in France. And then my two uncles and my aunt who went together as teenagers, my uncles Chu Anh and Chu Long, and my aunt Go Chang, who escaped Vietnam by boat and then made it on a refugee camp in one other part of Southeast Asia, and then made it to the US. So that is I consider that part of my family's immigration story too, my extended family, and who was able to come here by boat and who couldn't, who were not successful in leaving Vietnam during this political crisis, during the first wave, and had to stay. And back then, it was very much like you didn't really have a plan. It just was, you got a knock on the door one day and they said, okay, you're going to leave Vietnam today. And you just had to trust the person that was telling you that. Like, you had to have your payment for that person to take you out of the country, and you couldn't have anything else in that whole process. So back then, actually, the time when my uncles and my aunt left, my dad was supposed to be the one who left Vietnam with them. However, because he just happened to not be home that day, he didn't get to go. So my uncle was the one who went instead. And that's why we have it, years later, where my dad meets my mom. And because he was against the Communist Party, he didn't get an opportunity to have a career or a job. So that's why him and my mom ended up opening up this, I don't know what you would call it, but like a pig farm, so that they could raise pigs and sell them, because that was the only career that he had open to him due to being a political enemy of the ruling party. And so that's a picture of my parents with their pigs that they raised, because I think it's such like a funny and a cute picture, but it's also showing the career that they had to have because they didn't have access to other careers. due to just where their political stance was. So if we go to the next slide, what ended up happening was later on, the United Nations decided that after seeing so much traumatic things happen to Vietnamese refugees and a lot of them dying in the process of leaving this country, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees created the Orderly Departure Program. And this was the first program they had created to help refugees immigrate from their countries of origin through either one, family reunification, two, being a former US employee, or three, if they were a former re-education camp detainee. And so my father fell into the third category. And this category of folks was, their immigration was supported by a sub-program of the UNHCR, which was called the Humanitarian Operation, or HO. And so growing up, I heard about HO, but I had no idea what it was until I was an adult and I pursued my own education. But it was through this bill, or through this program, that my family was able to come over to the US. And this picture on the left actually is a picture of us at the airport in Vietnam, where my family had to leave behind everything we knew, sponsored by this program, to come to the US as kind of part of the third wave of refugees. And I just remember my dad telling me how he felt so sad. He felt really sad this day. I think about it and I get a little emotional, actually, because for him, he was thinking about how he had aging elderly parents, so my grandparents, and he had to leave them. And for him, like, as a son, as the oldest son, like, the responsibility is to take care of your parents, you know, but he had to make a choice, and a choice that other people wanted him to make too, was to leave them so that he could pursue this new life, so that he could pursue economic mobility, economic stability, for like our family and for the future of me and my siblings. So that's like a really important picture, because it just shows everyone that we had to take a break from it. At that time, we didn't know when we would ever come back to Vietnam. Like, we didn't know if we would ever see them again. Like, it's not like we had predictability of what the situation would be like. And that was in February 1994. So you would think in the 90s, maybe you would know more, but you didn't. You just really didn't know when you were going to be able to come back. And so on the right picture, that's my uncle Tu Anh, who had actually escaped Vietnam by boat with my aunt and uncle as a teenager. And so he had grown up in the US, his teenage, young adult years and adult years too. And he actually was pivotal too to our immigration to the US, because of supporting us in regards to guidance, how to navigate American culture, but also financially sponsoring us in certain areas as well. So he's also key to our immigration story. And as we go to, or actually keeping on this slide too, I want to talk about how my family's immigration story, it was at this time when a lot of refugees and a lot of people were immigrating, because there were so many wars happening in Southeast Asia, and there was remnants of the Korean War. So my immigration story is very much, it's similar to folks who are also immigrating from Cambodia, from Laos as well, because of the political conflicts that was happening. And it was a new era of family-based immigration policies too, where the US and the UN were trying to prioritize more family reunification. So this was relatively new. And also because my family had immigrated to the US in 1994, this is only 4 years after the US had officially created Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which was in May 1990. So this is only 4 years after that. And my family personally didn't really know too much about what was happening in the US in terms of racial history and racial dynamics, but we just knew we were coming to a country that had more economic opportunity, even though there may be other issues at hand for us. And I think a lot about how my family and a majority of Vietnamese diaspora, like, would not be in the diaspora if not for war. And I think a lot about how that war, that political conflict, led to me not having the opportunity to grow up in my homeland, to really know to fully immerse in my culture, to fully immerse in all elements of that culture, whether that is language, whether that is like customs and beliefs. And I think about how unfair it is a lot of times, even though, you know, I can't change who I am and the person I've become. but I just think a lot about what could it have been like if not for war, and what it could have been like for all of us to be able to choose to grow up in our homelands, or choose like where we want to go as adults when we have the autonomy for ourselves and make that decision, versus having to out of this necessity for survival or necessity for stability. So I'll move on to the next slide now. And the next slide is a picture. On the left is actually a picture of me and my 3 siblings that did immigrate to the US as refugees with our parents. So at the time, there was only 4 of us: my oldest brother, my older sister, my older brother, and me, which is the baby in the fur like outfit. And the reason, it's so funny, is because coming from Vietnam, which is a super hot climate, like California feels very cold to you. Like you experience your first California, and we came here in February, right? So it's the middle of winter. So we felt very cold, and we're just like not used to this climate at all. And so it was like part of this process too, of adapting to a totally different environment, like environmental weather and factors as well. So I show this because, and then it wasn't until 1997, 3 years later, that the picture on the right, my little brother was born in the US. So he's the only one of my siblings who actually was a naturalized American citizen, whereas the rest of us, we had to wait for our parents to take the test and pass the test in order for us to receive that citizenship. But I bring this up because I think a lot about how it would have been really useful. It would have been really useful to learn more about Asian American and Pacific Islander studies growing up, because growing up, actually, I was raised in San Jose in Santa Clara County. So I was really lucky to be in a community of storytellers, right, within my family and within community groups that I was part of through the Vietnamese Catholic community, and just through the Oak Grove School District and East San Union High School District. Like, I was very thankful to have a lot of other Vietnamese people in those areas, and I could hear those stories. However, most of that time, it was like hearing about the war stories and hearing about our parents' trauma and hearing just about like their sacrifices and struggles. And I think for me, it would have been really helpful to hear more about other Asian American experiences growing up, or other historical incidents as well, to better understand our context of why else are we here in the US, or what led us to being here in the first place, and also to understand what is our role here in the US now that we are here, beyond the fact that we left this political instability to be here. Like, what would it mean? What does it mean now for us to be here? Like, what is our contribution, or what have we contributed, even though we may not have wanted to be here in the first place? And so those are just things I think about. And I think about this when I see these pictures of me and my siblings, because growing up, it was not easy. Like, I have 3 older siblings, but I was the first to graduate with a college degree amongst my siblings. And there was a lot of issues that we went through, from mental health to trying to navigate like being in the US and being in this culture. So I just think that if there was more education in my K through 12 experience about what the war was, not from a Eurocentric, Western, or white nor anti-communist perspective, and what it means for the diaspora to exist here in the US, it would have been helpful to, I think, better navigate like what my future choices would have been like, or how to make sense with my identity as well. So that's my immigration story that I wanted to share with you all. And I think the main takeaways from my story really is that it's I don't know, that it's really complicated. There's a lot of emotions that come with my immigration story. And I know there's a lot of emotions that come with other folks' immigration stories as well. And acknowledging that even though I am part of a wave of other Southeast Asian refugees that came to the US at that time, even amongst those countries, there was conflict between those countries and different dynamics between them too. And I also grew up with a friend that's I didn't grow up, but one of my best friends I made through college, who's Cambodian. Like, I remember us telling each other that it's unreal that we are best friends in this lifetime because our parents, they have so much political conflict with each other that they have held that prejudice from their generation. And so we talk about that too in the nuances, even amongst the diaspora. So yeah, thank you all for listening.